Well, hello, everyone. Danielle Smith, president of Alberta Enterprise Group. And today we're going to be talking about the Clean Fuel Standard, which is now the Clean Fuel Regulation. Now, those of you who have heard me talk about this before must think I'm very dense because it's taken me a long time to even understand what this is, because I thought that we had a carbon tax on fuels, so gasoline and diesel, our home heating natural gas as well. I thought that that was the way that we were supposed to be pricing carbon dioxide emissions. And so I didn't understand, and I've interviewed people before, why do we also need to have this additional standard? And you'll know more by the end of this episode because we have an expert who is going to explain all to us. His name is Jason Vaillant. I hope I got that right, Jason. And he is with the Canadian Fuels Association. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Yeah, nice to be here. Thanks, Danielle.
Now, maybe we can start with that, is trying to understand, is this a layering on of regulations on the same types of fuel? It seems to me that if you believe in carbon pricing and we're going to see CO2 tonnage go up to $170 per ton, is this going to just end up doubling on top of that, or is it meant to be complementary?
Well, I think it is meant to be complementary, and really what the Clean Fuel Standard and now the Clean Fuel Regulation is all about is accelerating that reduction in carbon intensity related to fuels.
Okay, so we're going to talk through what this actually means, just so that people understand, and then we're going to find out the impact that it's been having on your members and industry and on prices. So first of all, initially when this was being proposed, they were proposing that this clean fuel standard to reduce emissions intensity, and again, we'll try to explain all of this, was supposed to apply to liquid fuels, gaseous fuels, and solid fuels. Now, through a bunch of consultation, they ended up just narrowing in and zeroing in on liquid fuels. Are you able to explain a little bit about why that is?
Well, I think that emissions related to transportation in Canada are about 25% of the overall emissions profile. So that's the biggest part of the pie, and that's the the part that we can move forward with the quickest.
Okay, so they're zeroing in on transport. That doesn't mean that they won't at some future point apply it to gaseous fuels or solid fuels, but this is really trying to take the biggest chunk first.
Yeah, I mean, that's really up for the government to decide in terms of how to tackle the next stages. But, for right now, our members and our associations looking to work with the Clean Fuel Regulation and when it does come into effect, make it result in lowering emissions.
Okay, so the Clean Fuel Standard is going to require liquid fuels, so gasoline, diesel, and home heating fuel. I better just first clarify, do your members deal in all three of those, or are you just focused on the transportation side, gasoline and diesel? I don't want to go down a rabbit hole on home heating if you don't have
Nope.
any members who supply that too.
Home heating fuel is part of the product mix for our members, and recently the decision was made and the announcement was made that home heating fuels would be exempt at this stage in terms of the clean fuel regulation. So both home heating fuels as well as stationary equipment fuels made for that application. So that's a relatively recent development.
I can tell because I'm looking at the government website right now and they still have home heating oil on there. So the change was made and they haven't updated the official government website yet. But maybe you can tell us who uses home heating oil, because I'm in Western Canada, Alberta, and we typically use, I think, almost exclusively natural gas. I think there's some who are using coal and some who are using wood burning, but I don't even know where home heating oil typically is being used.
Yeah, so that's part of being representing a national sector with different applications and different realities in different parts of our country. So if you look at the Atlantic provinces, Quebec, a large portion of the homes and businesses would operate with heating oil, and the infrastructure is obviously different, and it's a different market, but it's still part of the mix and the landscape that we need to deal with here in Canada.
Okay, so now we get into some of the technical details of this. It says that the approach is, so take your point now. It says gasoline and diesel, not aviation fuel though, huh? It's just gasoline and diesel?
That's right for the time being, anyways.
Okay, so gradually reduce the carbon intensity of the fuels they produce and sell for use in Canada over time, leading to a decrease of approximately 13% below 2016 levels in carbon intensity for liquid fuels used in Canada by 2030. Oh my goodness, that's a big
Right.
mouthful. Now, do you have anything to say about these kinds of targets? First of all, like why is 2016 chosen as the target date? Because most of the dates that I see when we're looking at reducing our carbon emissions, they normally look at either 2030 or 2050, but the benchmark I've seen has been 2005. And when you go back and look at emissions, 2005 seems to have been a high watermark year, and then
Mhm.
it's come down a little bit since then. But what's the magic of choosing 2016? Do you know?
I don't know the answer to that question, but certainly there has been investments already made, and we want to ensure that the latest technology that already has been invested in um, enters into the equation here.
Okay. And then also a target of it says approximately 13%, which is kind of a funny way of putting it. It doesn't sound like they rounded that. But again, is there any magic to 13%? Does that put us in league with some in competition or in at least in parity with anyone else that is doing this? Do you know why they chose that number?
I don't know why the number was chosen, but I can tell you it's not a linear equation, and I think you're dealing with estimates and best guesses in terms of what the technology that we have today and some of the emerging technologies can do in terms of getting us to that lower emissions profile.
Okay, so there's a few things that they've identified as ways in which they want to promote this. So they've made an investment of $1.5 billion towards low carbon and the zero emissions fuels fund. And with that, they're intending to support the increase of domestic production of low carbon fuels and their adoption. Now, they say such as hydrogen and biofuels. So put some context around that for me. Is in the national context, is a $1.5 billion investment, is that gonna be significant?
Well, it's a start, I guess, is what I would say. But I think we're looking at multiple billions of dollars of investment to get where we need to go ultimately. So you have to start somewhere, and there's already been investments made by companies in our sector and by our members in many of these categories. So we'll continue along that path.
Okay, people need to, I think, understand what low carbon fuels are. Now, let's begin with hydrogen as a for instance, because that
Mhm.
seems to be a new discussion that we've been having in the last year. We've got the federal government seems to be quite interested in a hydrogen strategy. We know we've got a hydrogen hub that's developing in the Edmonton area, major investment by a hydrogen net zero company, Air Products, I believe it's called. So there does seem to be some renewed interest in hydrogen as a solution. Can you provide a little bit of context about why it is all of a sudden people are talking about hydrogen?
Well, I think the fact is that hydrogen has been around for a long time, and in fact, our members are some of the largest producers of hydrogen in Canada and have been for decades, and that's used in the refining process and something that we've got a lot of experience with. I think as a transportation fuel and energy type, that's where some of the newness comes in, and it is being used. There's some examples that have cropped up in BC along with the policies that they've implemented there. So it is happening. It's going to take some time for the infrastructure to be in place, for the distribution network and everything to pivot towards that. In terms of being on a broad scale or a broad application for consumers.
I'll talk to you about that more in just 1 minute because I want to put it into context because I think we've got 3 hydrogen filling stations in British Columbia right now. One in Vancouver proper, I think one in Burnaby and one in Kelowna. I think I read that we have 42 hydrogen filling stations in California, but that's a bit of a drop in the bucket when you compare it to the number of gas stations that we have. So I'll get you to comment on that in just a minute. But first, let's talk about biofuels. I think when people think of biofuels, most of what they're thinking is ethanol, whether it comes from, if you look at the Brazilian example, coming from sugarcane, or whether you look at the North American example, seems like corn is the principal source of that. Am I on the right track, or is biofuels broader than that?
Well, biofuels are much broader than that, and I think corn-based ethanol, which is still in the market here today in Canada, it can be seen as older generation products, whereas some of the feedstocks and the next generation fuels that we talk about when it comes to biofuels have soy, canola, household waste, animal fats. There's any number of feedstocks that can be brought to bear to make biofuels, and these, some of these applications are already being commercialized. Some are emerging, but I think the next generation will look far different than what we've seen over the last 20 years.
So, which is going to be easier to integrate into the existing fuel system? I guess one of the things that comes to my mind is that as we're talking, and I know this is a different application, but they're looking at a way of blending hydrogen into our natural gas stream to for home heating to reduce the CO2 profile of that. And I think that the most that they can do is 20% before you start ending up with a need for different infrastructure, because you need different pipes, different materials, so that you don't end up with a corrosion problem or a leakage problem. That's my understanding of it. But what are some of the complexities about building out the hydrogen infrastructure into transportation fuels? Because it does seem like it needs an entirely different fuels. Like when I've seen the pumps in the stations where they have showcased it, it's entirely different pump and it's entirely different company providing it. So what are some of the factors that have to be considered if we're going to build out that infrastructure in a major way?
Well, it is all facets of that infrastructure that do need to be adapted, and that's from transporting it to storage it to storing it to the infrastructure you would need on site to get it into the vehicle. So you think about the fact in Canada today we've got 12,000 plus retail sites, and that's the infrastructure that's been building over 100 and some years, and so that has a purpose, and it comes with a certain level of reliability and safety, and we have a good grasp of what that capability is. So to pivot towards hydrogen or other fuel types is going to take a whole system change in order to accommodate that, and it's not necessarily just our members. There's multiple stakeholders when it comes to making a change on that scale.
So I just want to underscore what you said. 12,000 fueling stations in the country right now, and as far as I know, we have 3 that have hydrogen as an option. I'm trying to even imagine how quickly, let's say there was an aspiration to get hydrogen filling stations co-located at all 12,000 locations. It seems like a pretty large logistical challenge to do it. What do you think people should expect? How quickly can that be rolled out?
Well, I think you can only go as fast as there, and a number of factors are going to drive that speed, and part of it is capital availability. So it's not cheap, or it's not free to build out new infrastructure. It's going to be what do the consumers demand? Where is the market? And it might not look the same all the way across Canada, but it is numbers wise it's quite a stark difference. But I think as things evolve and you look at those 12,000 retail sites and the refueling stations that are in existence today, that's in many ways prime real estate. It's got great opportunity to adapt to any number of fuel types, and I think the companies that will cater to what the consumers are looking for are going to succeed.
Let's talk then about the other side of it with biofuels. I get the sense that it's a little easier to work these biofuels into the existing stream, and maybe you can explain that. Is it really just a matter of mixing it at the refinery? Does it get mixed on site? Is there some limit to how much you can feasibly add to existing hydrocarbon fuels before before for some reason it becomes less effective? Can you sort of
Sure. Maybe we
link
can
that out
break
for
that
us?
down in a few components. So So blending it, yes, and blending it all together is possible up to certain limits. And it's about what the vehicles can handle, and what the limits or constraints might be on that. And that includes automakers and stakeholders, and again consumers, in terms of what what that market might look like. But biofuels are a bit more fungible in terms of, yes, the blending is possible, and it does though take some different pipes and storage and transportation that needs to be added to the mix. So there is investment that needs to be made, but again, we think a strategic asset for Canada is this network that we have from coast to coast. It's not just the on the retail site, but we have terminals, fuel terminals, where some of that blending happens, where the retail sites are supplied from. So we've got this great asset that can be used, and our members are caretakers of that infrastructure, and that's a great opportunity going forward to help enable and make the new energy types flourish.
Can you talk a bit about that? Because I have a little flex fuel sign on the back of my Ford Escape, and I'm not sure I know exactly what that means. I think it means that I would be able to use a 100% ethanol product. Or maybe it doesn't mean that. I thought that there was what does flex fuel mean on vehicles? Because you talked about the issue being how much can you blend, that you would have to modify vehicles to be able to make that happen. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, I don't want to give you any advice and that I'm not qualified to provide in terms of what you can put in your car, Danielle. But certainly flex fuel means that those engines have been developed with the opportunity to expand the whatever that kind of bio content in the fuel is. So we know that some car makers previously had E85 capable on the same kind of stickers or decals. So I think it's not necessarily up to the fuel makers to decide that. It's a multi-stakeholder decision and transition that would need to happen in order to push the envelope on what that bio content would be.
Okay, so you've made a note to self that I've got to talk to somebody in one of the automakers to understand what kind of changes need to be made and how quickly they can be made. So that's very helpful to understand.
And that's part of the collaboration that we think is necessary, because it's not, we look at it as an entire transportation system, and we're one piece of the puzzle, but by working together with the other sectors, it's that broader transportation strategy that Canada needs, and that's how we're going to leverage all of the capability that we've got as a country, and not necessarily have stovepipes in terms of the different fuel types. It needs to be looked at in an integrated way.
Well, let's talk about one of the other stovepipes, and that's they've also got $150 million for funds to accelerate the deployment of infrastructure for zero-emission vehicles and continue to support electrification. Now, what I've observed with the places where they have these electrification units is I don't think that they're co-located with very many gas stations. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. I do know that in my hometown, we've got two that have been installed at one of the credit unions in town, which is maybe a bit of an odd place for them. But I don't know what the strategy is for building out the electrification. It almost seems like it's let's build it first and then create the opportunity for people to get electric cars. But I don't know if that's going to work for the members that you have. And maybe you can just give me an idea of some of the challenges of co-locating some of the electric vehicle plugins.
Yeah, so I would say that from an electrification strategy, lots of charging stations are required, and I think our members and through their retail sites are able to provide some of that and support that effort. But you've been to different types of retail sites, and that some are larger than others. There's different sizes of footprints and different offerings that. They use their real estate for. So just having a charging station at each gas station might not be practical or feasible. So I think the members are looking to see what sites they have that could accommodate this, but also where is the market going? Where will that demand be? And how do we understand that customer experience? It's much different than filling your gas tank, which is a much shorter time frame than charging your vehicle. And how does that work? And how do they capture the attention of customers?
Well, it does make sense, perhaps, that you would co-locate those electric stations with gas stations are building out so many different services. So there are plenty of gas stations where you have a restaurant, for instance. So maybe it makes sense that if you're going to stop and have a bite to eat, that would be the obvious place to have an electric charging station. But maybe comment a little bit on that, because I watched Who Killed the Electric Car, and then I think there was an update to it because the electric car, and I think the predictions of its death were a bit premature. It seems to be coming on full steam ahead. Maybe Elon Musk had something to do with it with Tesla. But I think my recollection was that they talked about the fueling station of the future, where no matter what type of vehicle you pull in and you can fill up with gasoline or diesel or ethanol or hydrogen or electricity all at the same spot. Is that feasible? Do you think that's the direction that we're moving?
Well, I think the market will kind of dictate that over time, and those that those companies and those entrepreneurs that kind of figure out a way to monetize those opportunities are going to position themselves the best, because things are evolving, and I think it's clear that the retail sites will need to evolve as consumer behavior changes and demand changes.
There's a whole section here that I'm looking on their website where they talk about the fall economic statement proposed $2.6 billion in funding for home energy retrofits to reduce home heating costs related to home heating oil. You said that is off the table. I'd be letting my audience down if I didn't cynically comment that must be a pretty sure indicator that we're heading into a federal election this fall, that they don't want to impose an additional cost onto Eastern Canadians and Quebecers, since this seems to impact most of them. You don't need to comment on that, Jason, but it does seem like it might be a political move. Let's continue on, though. So let's talk a bit about how this is supposed to take place and how it is that fuels are supposed to become cleaner, because they've got this compliant, they talk about 3 ways that we're going to create credits. And this is kind of a new process for us, because I think that we've observed, particularly with the carbon tax, that's just sort of a deadweight cost, goes into a fund, and then it gets rebated back to taxpayers on their tax returns. So that's sort of one mechanism that we've seen for how you price carbon emissions. So they're talking here about they're calling it a life cycle approach that takes into the account the emissions associated with all stages of fuel production use, from extraction through processing, distribution, and end use. They want you to, this gets really complicated. They as you'd mentioned, we are going to see this phased in. So it's going to be by 2022 that these carbon intensity standards have to be met. And for people who are wonky and want to know what the number is, it's 2.4 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule, whatever the heck that means, gradually increasing over time to reach 12 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule by 2030. So almost like a 6-fold increase by the time it's implemented in 2012, going up to 2030. And we can talk a little bit about what the cost associated with that is going to be. But the whole purpose behind it is to try to get innovation and create new fuel options. And so when they talk about the approach they want to take, one is how you're going to be able to create credits. So there's 3 different categories. First category is undertaking projects that reduce the life cycle carbon intensity of fossil fuels. So they talk about carbon capture and storage. They talk about on-site renewable electricity. They talk about co-processing. Are you able to shed some light on how important this credit system is going to be in making all of this work?
Well, it will be hugely important, and companies will decide what that mix is in terms of the different categories that they're going to pursue. So, you talked about the first category, and for us, there's a couple of things that jump out for our sector. One is carbon capture and storage, and certainly, that's technology that's in play today. Could be improved, and costs will come down over time on that, and that's definitely of interest. But the other one that is maybe a bit easier to attain and is happening at a certain level already today is co-processing, and that's feedstock at a refinery coming in and basically bio content and oil coming in as the feedstock, which invariably produces a lower carbon product going through the system. So that is one that is of interest. And you think about all the refineries in the world and Europe and even closer to home in the US. These things are already happening. So it's about continuing that process and to evaluate whether or not that's feasible for a given refinery based on its history and its current makeup. So there, there's some huge promise there for our members, and certainly that's the kind of thing that we're looking at pursuing. And we put a vision statement out last year called Driving to 2050, and we talk about co-processing and carbon capture and those things that we can do in the on the production side of things that help to lower the carbon intensity. So that, along with lower carbon fuels and lower carbon liquids like biofuels, that's the area we're playing in today, and that's what we're looking to further develop as we move forward.
So they also seem to want to incent on-site renewable electricity. So I'm wondering what that would look like. I suppose the most obvious thing that would come to mind is installing solar panels at sites where it makes sense, or on rooftops, to be able to generate the electricity on site. Is that kind of the thing that's being contemplated? Or by creating a process where you can earn credits for that, what sort of things do you think might happen to create on-site renewable electricity?
I'm not aware of that happening within our business on a broad scale. If you think about the electricity demands of a manufacturing facility like the ones that our members run, it would need quite a few solar panels to enable that to happen. So I think they focus their attention on potential for co-processing and carbon capture in terms of making those investments.
Interesting. And you think carbon, I want to get your sense on carbon capture, because there is a big movement on the part of environmental groups. On July the 19th, they wrote a letter to the government of Canada as well as the Congress in the US saying, don't pursue carbon capture and storage and utilization. This is just going to prolong our use of fossil fuels. And I'm just wondering what you think. Is there real opportunity there for carbon capture and storage?
Well, I think it's in its infancy stage in terms of wide scale applications. So I think as we learn more and companies put their creative juices to play to solve these problems, that certainly is one option, and I think will only get better over time.
Okay, so the second compliance category, and that's what they're calling it. So these are different ways that companies are able to generate carbon credits that then presumably assume a market value that can be traded. And we'll talk about that in a second. But supplying customers with low carbon intensity fuel. So if you're supplying ethanol or biodiesel, and we've talked about the different types of biodiesel, that becomes a way for you to earn carbon credits. Am I reading that correctly?
No, that's correct. And actually today, our members and the companies that we represent, they produce about 25% of the biofuels in Canada. So we're already in that game. So that's a matter of what does that look like in the future? What opportunities are to expand that production capacity in Canada? And we, as a country, we have there's many different feedstocks, as we talked about before. So we've got the engineering know-how and the wide scale production experience to marry with the natural resources and the feedstocks that are available to make biofuels. So biofuels can be quite a powerful influence on all of this.
And this again might be a question, this next category, compliance category 3, this might be a question for my future auto sector guest. Investing in advanced vehicle technologies, electric or hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So carbon credits will be able to be earned as well for companies if they're doing production switches so that they can produce more electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Is that correct there too?
Yeah. So again, I think underscore there is that this is a broader transportation strategy and taking the emissions out of the transportation sector and process. So it's not just about fuel manufacturers. There's others in this game as well.
Well, this next one I find quite interesting because they talk about economic benefits of cleaner fuels, and I've often wondered what it is that our farmers and our foresters have to do to be able to get credit for the sequestration of carbon dioxide that they do. So that's a whole other discussion to have. But I note with interest here that what they say is that this is going to create economic opportunities for voluntary parties like biofuel producers and other low carbon fuel producers to create and sell credits, to create opportunities for feedstock providers like farmers and foresters to have lower carbon fuel production. So I'm trying to figure out who gets the credits on this, because it sounds like there's a great deal of credits that can be earned by members who are already producing this fuel. But how do you see farmers and foresters being able to benefit? Does that do you know how that side is going to work?
I don't know specifically, but certainly for us it's collaborating with those groups to understand where those opportunities or where those their synergies might be in terms of the fuels that are required and the feedstocks that are necessary to make those fuels. So certainly again this is a team effort when it comes to getting to some of these answers and not something that the transportation fuels sector alone is going to be able to tackle.
Let me put one more thing on the table because this came as a bit of a surprise to me as I was going through. They want a wide range of participants to have access to this economic opportunity. So any party can become a credit creator for residential electric vehicle charging. And then revenues from credits generated for electric vehicle charging must be reinvested in vehicle charging infrastructure, rebates for consumers, or electricity distribution infrastructure. And so I guess what that sounds like is they're trying to create a mechanism for anyone who could potentially have people parking all day long to install those electric outlets so that vehicles can be plugged in and offering credits up for that as well. Is that how you're interpreting that too?
Yeah, if you have a space in your driveway, Danielle, you might be able to monetize that.
All right, I'm going to have to look into that one. What are these credits going to be worth anyway? Because that's the other side of it, is there always seems to be some difference in what we get, what the price is when they're calculating it in turning it into a tax versus what you can get for a credit. And I'm wondering, it would seem to make some sense that the credits that you earn would follow along the same lines as the cost of the price of carbon, or are they two totally separate ways of pricing? I mean, the government has talked about a carbon price going up to $170 per ton based on, and that the carbon taxes that we pay on all those other fuels would be impacted by that. Is that going to be the same pricing structure for this credit market? Do you know?
I don't know the answer. I'm not sure they've got all of those ducks in a row yet in terms of understanding exactly how it's going to operate. But it is a market which will fluctuate depending on the success of some of these incentives and kind of how things unfold in terms of the investments that are made.
Okay, now let's talk about whether this is going to put us at a disadvantage relative to our competitors, because I'm a little confused about whether some of these renewable fuel standards already exist and this is layering on top, or if it's going to replace them. Because they have a section on their website where they say, for instance, in the United States, the renewable fuel standards a federal program, and it requires transportation fuel sold in the country to contain 36 billion gallons of renewable fuel blended into gasoline or diesel by 2022. But then California also has a low carbon fuel standard. They require a 20% reduction in transportation fuel carbon intensity by 2030. And it seems like we've got a few programs in Canada as well. But put this into context for us. Have some jurisdictions already been moving ahead on this? Are we behind, or are we actually at the forefront of it?
Well, I would say Canada as a whole is somewhat segmented in terms of some provinces that have moved forward. If you brought up the example of BC earlier, and the policies that they have put in place, before some of the other provinces have resulted in hydrogen charging stations, for example, and other things that you're seeing in that market before other places in Canada. So what we've proposed on a number of fronts is a national view on these things, because it's quite inefficient when you are as a producer or as a supplier, looking to supply a market as big as Canada, but there's differences every time you cross a provincial border, and that creates some inefficiencies and higher costs, and just makes it more difficult to do business.
Well, let me try to go through this quickly so people understand how different they are. So in BC, the renewable and low carbon fuel requirement mandates a 5% ethanol content in gasoline and 4% in diesel fuel. They also look like they're trying to stay in sync with what's happening in California. They want to achieve a 20% reduction in fuel carbon intensity by 2030. So that's actually more aggressive, I think, than what the federal government is striving for if it's 13%. Alberta, though, also has the renewable fuel standard. It requires a minimum annual average of 5% renewable alcohol in gasoline, 2% renewable diesel or renewable diesel in diesel fuel. And renewable fuels must demonstrate at least a 25% fewer greenhouse gas emissions than the equivalent petroleum fuel. You've also got Renewable Diesel Act in Saskatchewan, 2% renewable diesel content. They also have a 7.5% ethanol mandate. In Manitoba, they've got an ethanol mandate as well. Same with Ontario. They do say in Quebec, interestingly, they say that in Quebec, there is no mandate in effect, but the province is currently consulting on establishing a proposed mandate of 10% ethanol by 2021 and 15% by 2025. I just want to point that out because everybody always points to the West and Alberta in particular as being a laggard, but it seems to me like the West is actually further ahead than some of the other jurisdictions. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Well, the West is definitely ahead in this case. I think for us, it illustrates the complexity of doing business in different provinces, and you might have a refinery in one province that has a supply orbit into other provinces, and the ability to get on-spec gasoline in all areas, both urban and rural, it's quite a challenge. And I think that's a testament to our industry in terms of the reliability and us being there when people need to fill up. And it's a little bit like not appreciating hydro until you go to turn your lights on and it doesn't happen. There's so much going on behind the scenes 24/7 to make sure that that's available for customers, and the more you layer on, the more difficult that becomes, and the more expensive it becomes for providing that service.
So put into context for me, because we're doing this incremental approach on the fuels that we put into our tanks. But then you also saw a policy or a pronouncement in Quebec that after 2035, they are no longer going to sell combustion engine vehicles. And so, and we've seen those same kind of announcements around the world. And I'm trying to understand whether that's achievable, whether that is reasonable, whether that's actually going to happen. I just, from the challenges you've put forward, can you really build out the alternative infrastructure on zero emissions vehicles, whether it's electric or hydrogen, to meet that kind of demand that by 2035 we're already going to say essentially every new vehicle would have to be a zero emissions vehicle? Can you give us a bit of a reality check on that?
Well, the one thing I would say is that you certainly need a level of redundancy in order to ensure that the mobility of people and goods can still happen. So, we have infrastructure in place today. It's working well, and it meets the needs of Canadians and consumers. And we need to be cognizant of the fact that there's different settings and different applications, and the needs of Canadians in terms of transportation is across a broad spectrum, and it's hard to figure that any one application is going to work in all cases. So I think and we just need to be cognizant of the fact that there is different needs and different types, and we think that low carbon liquid fuels, which is our business, is those are going to be around and needed for a long time to come. And that's really the focus of our association, to make sure that there's an understanding of the value of that today. But at the same time, we're in the solution space where we want to be around tomorrow. So it's not this quick swing. It's this very deliberate transition and more evolution in order to get to the low carbon future. But certainly part of our responsibility beyond lowering emissions is to enable a strong economy, and we want to make sure that all the sectors that we support, whether that be forestry or mining or fisheries, name them all, they rely on our products today, and we want to make sure that Canada continues to be successful.
Can you talk about, I know that there are naysayers out there, so I just want you to address a couple of things if you don't mind. Because, and I may be going based on old information and just on ethanol, as you've talked about, if you can essentially make biofuels from everything, including used restaurant canola oil. I know because I have some company that picks up my old restaurant canola oil for the restaurant that I have from my deep fryer, but all the way through to forestry, wood waste, through to garbage. If we can sort of isolate a stream, and rather than have that produce methane in landfills, we can actually turn into biodiesel or biofuel, then maybe the economics have changed. Because I seem to recall years ago watching a documentary suggesting that, yes, sugarcane in Brazil, the energy out is greater than the energy in, but if you look at corn, it's not so much, that it actually takes more energy to produce ethanol from corn than the ethanol produces. And I don't know if I'm working off accurate information or if things have changed with the passage of time. Can you put some context on that? Does it actually make sense to do? Are we doing it because of the regulations pushing us, or are we doing it because the economics also support it?
Well, I think there's no question that the technology has come a long way, and opening up different feedstocks just provides opportunities. And the one thing I think that we need to be somewhat patient about, and this talks about the time frame to evolve, is around the scope and the scale. So we have 16 refineries and 80 terminals and 12,000 retail sites. So we've got this infrastructure that we're able to supply and be reliable and kind of make things work. That size and that scale just isn't possible at this point to be a complete alternative. So that's part of what we're trying to advocate for, is that you need multiple pathways to get to net zero or to the low carbon future. No one of these is going to be the silver bullet that's going to solve all of our problems. And by integrating them in the most optimized way, that's how we're going to, as a country, succeed. So it's more about collaboration versus running down our own path, trying to do it alone.
Okay, let's talk about the ethics as well, because there are those who raise ethical concerns about using food to turn into fuel to put into our gas tanks. Are we crowding out agricultural production? Have we addressed some of those issues, and if so, how have we addressed them?
Well, I think some of that would be for the agricultural folks to comment on, but I can tell you that the way the trend has been is to use waste. So whether that's animal fats, that's wood stover. There's a number of products. So I don't think it's a trade-off in terms of arable land for fuel in the same way it may have been in the past. So that I think the opportunities that are opened up in terms of the different feedstocks, I think minimize that to a certain degree.
Okay. Also wondering what else might be coming down the pike. I see a question here from Michael. He's saying, what about the production of emissions-free synthetic fuels? German companies have already done that successfully. Is there anything that you're looking out in the landscape around the world that you think might be a complete game changer like that? I'm not sure if you know what the reference is to the German product, but maybe you can give us an idea of what's being worked on in the field.
Well, I don't have a late breaking announcement to make to you today, but I can tell you that that's the kind of thing that our members and companies around the world are going to pursue to sort of balance out that lowering of emissions, and then maintaining the reliability and the the ability to keep our economy moving. So I think if there's some solutions out there, that's great. It's going to take some time for those to be commercialized, but it's the investments that are going to be made in those areas that we don't even know about today that could be the solution 10 years from now. But given the capital requirements, given what we talked about in terms of infrastructure, these things do take some time to come to fruition. So you test and you do some pilots and things, and then fully commercializing something is a far different story. So to the extent we can get those things to market and at scale, fabulous. But we do need to be somewhat patient to make sure that it does work, and we don't sacrifice anything in terms of availability or reliability of fuels.
Let's talk about reliability just for a minute, because I live outside of a major center, 45 minutes, which is why I'm a lot more excited about the potential for hydrogen than I am for electric. I just don't feel like I would be that confident driving an hour into Calgary when it's minus 30, knowing that you lose some of your range, not knowing if I'll find a place to plug in, having to drive an hour back home. Electric doesn't seem, for me, living in a more rural environment, to be optimal. It doesn't seem to be like a real solution. I can see how it would be in an urban setting, especially if you can plug in at work or you have enough charge to get you home and back. But what are some of the issues that we have to sort through from a rural perspective?
Well, I think you just sort of provided an example of how there's a spectrum of needs, and there is no silver bullet. So I think that's what our message has been, is that it's going to take those multiple pathways, and we want the rural person, the person in rural Alberta, to have the same opportunity as someone in downtown Montreal to get around and be successful in whatever they want to do. So it's in a country as large as Canada, and as dispersed in terms of population, I think that's very important to keep in mind, is that we do have different customers with different needs.
Let's then also talk about how we're going to pay for roads in the future. And I don't know if it's the case in all jurisdictions, but in Alberta, we've got a very clear our fuel tax that we pay. I think it's about 9 cents a liter. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong. But that goes towards road construction. And so we have a direct connection. And aside from the carbon tax that's charged, aside from this clean fuel standard that would have credits associated with it, we've got a dedicated tax on gasoline and diesel that then go towards road construction. Now, I don't know that we've got the same thing as we're talking about all of these alternative fuels. And do we need to have that conversation? How are roads going to be paid for? Because whether it's going to be electric or whether it's going to be hydrogen, whether it's going to be something else, you still need roads to drive on, and they'll still need to be repaired.
That is one of the economic realities that we need to wrestle with as we move forward and as things evolve. So today in Canada, about 40% of the price of gasoline that you pay at the pump goes towards road taxes, and that helps to maintain the infrastructure that we've got and build out new infrastructure, and that's shared amongst the feds, the provinces, and municipalities. So that's billions of dollars that needs to be recovered somehow, because regardless of what's powering your vehicle, you're still going to be on roads and highways and need to have access to to safe passageway regardless. So that is something definitely that as a sector, working with government, that we need to make sure it doesn't get lost in the mix.
Have you seen anything around the world that we should be preparing ourselves for? I remember years ago reading an article that it must have been from the Fraser Institute, where they talked about completely changing the way that we charge out the pricing on road use, so that you would have a bunch of sensors and cameras on the road, and you would measure how many kilometers people drive, so that you'd have maybe a turnpike off, and it would almost be like a toll. And I suppose you could do that now because we've got cameras everywhere and we've got the
Mhm.
ability to have AI and machine learning process it all. But when you think about where we're transitioning to, it does seem to make sense that you'd actually start charging people based on usage of roads. But maybe this is still pie in the sky.
Mhm.
Maybe, do you have some idea of how that is being grappled with in other jurisdictions?
I haven't, but just to kind of illustrate your point, I live in Ontario, and we've got the 407 electronic toll road, and you never have to uh, produce anything to show that you're on this highway, but you'll still get a bill if you choose to use it. So the
Hmm.
technology is definitely out there. You hear also about cities in Europe and other jurisdictions, how they're paying to go into certain areas, and trying to keep cars out of city centers, and charging tolls to be able to do those kinds of things. So I think that's the world we live in, and those that's for governments to explore whether or not they feel that's part of the mix.
All right. One more thing I want to ask you about, though, is the cost side, because I get the impression, talking with you, that your members are up to the challenge, that you're looking for the opportunities, that you think you can make it work, that you're going to sort through logistical issues. But I feel like from a delivery point of view, this is something that your members can deliver on. Am I summarizing that correctly?
I say we absolutely can. And if you look at the way our business has evolved over the last 100 years, like, they've always met the challenges in terms of regulations and formulations. So, taking sulfur out of gasoline, in the last 20 years, for example, that, we rose to that challenge. And I think this is a challenge for us to rise to again, and certainly might even feel a bit more daunting this time around, and require some thinking and approaches that we haven't used before. But based on the entrepreneurial spirit and the experience we've got within our sector, we're confident that we can be part of that low carbon future. And things will evolve, and it might look a bit different, but we feel that low carbon liquid fuels can be around for generations, and
Hmm.
it's really for up to us to prove that through the investments and the new businesses that we explore.
All right. Let me then ask about cost, because I'll just put on a consumer hat for 1 minute, because I think we all expect that whatever additional costs are associated with bringing these new fuels in, it's going to be passed on to the consumer. Now, the Canadian Energy Research Institute did a study in 2019 estimating the following costs to Canadians that would result from the clean fuel standards. So they say gasoline and diesel are estimated to increase 5 to 11 cents per liter by 2030. They had something on here on natural gas. Maybe that's not going to have an impact, because we talked about how that is going to be deferred. Total cost impacts for the Canadian economy estimated to range from 7.6 billion to 15.3 billion annually by 2030. Estimated increased costs of approximately $1 to $2 billion per year for the oil and natural gas sector alone. And then the cost per ton of carbon dioxide reduced will be 5 times higher than the current carbon pricing. So it gives the impression, I think, that this would be more effective than carbon pricing. But those seem like large numbers, and I'm always wary when I do see projections, because anytime you get entrepreneurs and innovators involved in a file, they find ways to find efficiencies and bring prices down. But can you put that into context for us? Are you concerned about the additional cost that'll have to be passed on to your customers?
Well, I think that is a reality of the types of investments that need to be made in terms of the cost structure and the investments for that innovation. So that's really going to be up to consumers in terms of what their sensitivity is to price increases, and that will let the market decide.
Okay, so this in total is supposed to bring the reduction in emissions by 20 million tons, so 20 megatons. Now, I was just looking at what our objective is to reduce our overall emissions by 2030 by 45% of what their high water mark was. So we need to reduce, I think, 325 megatons. This is 20 megatons. So put it into context about how significant that is.
No, it's a huge challenge, and I think it will take, the creative expertise and the innovation that exists within our sector with other stakeholders as well. So, climate change is a tough challenge for all of us, and by kind of leaning on some of the strengths that we have, I think we can meet that challenge. But I think we're just going to have to look at it in different ways and have different partners going forward.
All right. Anything that we missed? We covered a lot of ground here. And you and I had a pre-conversation. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything, any other points that you wanted to raise before I let you go, Jason.
No, I think we're excited as a sector in terms of being part of that solution and being part of the low carbon future. And we've got a good history to fall back on in terms of finding ways to make things happen, and we're going to look to do that again.
All right. Thank you so much for your time today. I sure appreciate it. We'll have to do a check-in with you in a few years and see how this transition's going.
Sure thing, Danielle. Take care.
You got it. That's Jason Vaillant. He is, once again, with the Canadian Energy Research Institute. He's Vice President of Communications and Outreach for the Canadian Fuels Association. So now we know a little bit more about that program. And I guess my concern is that it's just a layering on top of the additional carbon taxes that we already have. And look at what we have for pricing right now. I don't know what you're paying in your neck of the woods, but I think I filled up for $1.41 at the pump. So now, if that is what the price at the pump is, when we're looking at what, a $40 carbon tax. We've been told we're going to $170 carbon tax by 2030. It's going to have two manifestations, one being through the carbon taxes paid on the clean fuel standard to bring in more biofuels. The other will be a direct price that you're paying. That implies that we're going to be getting over $2 a liter in gasoline and diesel. And so the question would be, what kind of changes would you make if it starts going up that high? Is that something that is going to be feasible? Are we moving too quickly on it? Is it going to create disparity in urban and rural Canada? So you guys give me some of your thoughts on that. You can always email me, Danielle@albertaenterprisegroup.com. But I'm going to bring in my colleague, John Liston now, Vice President of Alberta Enterprise Group. We're just going to have a little conversation about some of the things that we are up to, because we have an enormous lobbying agenda that begins with these kinds of issues, but extends out onto a whole number of other issues. John, thanks for being here. I'm going to sort of turn the tables and hand it over to you to talk to me about what I'm up to, and we'll talk about a few of the initiatives that we've got going on.
Perfect. Thanks, Danielle. That was a great discussion, and it's it's funny because when it comes right down to it, it's the consumer who's going to decide all of this, but the free market isn't the one who's implying the first piece of energy on it. So I'm always intrigued by the thought that, okay, well, the market will tell us. Well, the market tells you, stop charging us all carbon taxes.
Yeah, I don't know that the market's got much choice in that. But it amazed me how optimistic he was that they would be able to meet the standard. That from a logistical point of view, really challenging when you talk about building out brand new infrastructure into 12,000 existing stations. But he didn't really give me the sense that he thought that it was going to be impossible to do, even though it's a pretty aggressive target.
It'll be interesting to watch, and again, we will be in the middle of it.
You bet.
So listen, I asked if I could come on with you, Danielle, because since you joined us, and I think it's about 3 months now, just over 3 months. You and I get a chance to talk every day and to talk about a lot of the different issues that we want to advocate for. Businesses tell us what the issues are, but I get, I know because you and I talk about it every day, but I think some of our members don't know some of the stuff that we're doing. And I thought now's a good time. It's, the end of July, early August, and it's a good time to probably update some of our members on some of the different projects. So I've got a list here. I just want to kind of ask you about each of them, and then we can have a bit of a discussion about them. The first one is the abandoned oil well and the oil well cleanup project that's been going on. You've been very involved in it, and I think we should probably talk about the number of MLAs that you've met with in the last month, because it's most of them.
Yeah, well, and it is, I want to give a shout out to Chris Kinnear from the Sustaining Alberta's Energy Network, because when I first got hired on at Alberta Enterprise Group, one of our mutual friends, Dave Yeager, gave him my cell phone number. And I answered the phone one day because I was expecting another call. And he said, I just need 5 minutes of your time. And he was trying to pitch me on this proposal. And it was intriguing. But I said, there's no way this is a 5-minute conversation. So we ended up having a 2-hour conversation where he walked me through what his proposal is. And part of what we're observing is that we now have a pretty good handle on what the liabilities are on our non-active well sites. I think for a lot of years, we kept focusing on orphan wells, companies that would go under, and there would be nobody left to clean up those sites. And the Orphan Well Association had a $15 million annual budget, and they would clean up a few hundred well sites. And we didn't really have a full idea of the full scope of the problem. So they came through with a different program on licensee liability management. And so part of what they've done is they've assessed the liability to clean up all of the sites that are inactive in Alberta. And it's a pretty big number. We're approaching $30 billion now of the liability for cleanup. If you look at our assets, doesn't look so bad, $142 billion. And we've got a bunch of production. The problem is not every company is in the same shape. And once we had the Redwater decision that came down a few years ago, it basically said any creditor has to stand in line behind the environmental cleanup. Environmental cleanup comes first. So in practice, what that's meant is all the junior oil and gas companies who have a low licensee management ratio or liability management ratio, they are the ones who are finding it very difficult to raise money in the capital markets. If you can't raise money for new drilling, you don't end up with new revenues. You don't end up with new revenues. You end up getting distressed, and you're not able to clean up your well sites. You're not able to pay your municipal property taxes. There's about a $240 million unpaid bill of municipal property taxes. There's probably about the same amount of unpaid bills to landowner leases. So this is not a sustainable approach. If we keep going down this path, what we're going to see is that more and more junior oil and gas companies are going to go under. More and more wells are going to get handed over to the Orphan Well Association. And in the end, if there aren't enough viable companies to pay the associated fees with cleaning up those orphaned wells, then it's going to fall to taxpayers. So Chris has a pretty novel approach, but I think a good one, which would be to give a royalty credit for abandoning wells and then use it to offset royalties for new production. And we already do something like this with oil sands. We allow for oil sands producers to pay a 1% royalty until they pay off the cost of capital. We allow for our oil and gas drillers to pay off their cost of drilling by only paying a 5% royalty. So this would tack on to that. So if you went out and did a major cleanup of a really nasty well and it cost $1 million, you'd be able to pay that lower royalty rate until it was paid off. And so we've met with a number of MLAs because it was Stampede. And so we just kept on bumping into MLAs all over the place. But I also had a chance to meet with Energy Minister Sonia Savage and ask her if she'd do a pilot project in the fall, because we know that we've got a federal grant associated with site reclamation that's coming to an end in 2022. We have a huge number of companies that have developed great expertise in being able to abandon wells, and we don't want to lose that momentum. So we're working to see if we can get a pilot project that would not only focus on the worst wells, the ones that have been inactive for a long period of time, where the original the company that drilled it is long gone, and it's just the last guy holding the bag today, as well as finding some certainty of taking it through the entire process. Because what we've observed is that because it's easy to do the downhole abandonment, that's what most of the reclamation is right now. And the surface reclamation isn't getting done because it's hard to get certainty on that, a surface reclamation certificate. So we're going to see if we can do some work around getting some certainty there. I've met with Environment Minister Jason Nixon on that as well. And then also having some kind of long-term approach that once you've got final sign-off, that some of these sites are going to need to be revisited at some future point. And maybe that's a good role for the Orphan Well Association. You provide a little bit of an insurance premium, transfer them the sites, and if a percentage of them need to be revisited in future years, then at least we've got some money set aside for it. I just think we need to have a dramatically different approach to how we look at this reclamation issue. Otherwise, we're never going to end up cleaning up some of these well sites that have just been pushed forward for 30, 40, or 50 years.
So for those of us who aren't in the oil patch, we've got members across 15 different sectors. Help me understand the stakeholders. So there's the small company. Why would they have purchased this well if it was already not that productive? So that's the small oil company. There's the landowner. What's the impact on the landowner? There's the municipality, and then there's the government itself. I would say those are the four stakeholders, and me as a taxpayer is with that government piece. Help me understand those better.
I think that I think we all know what the landowner and the municipality is facing right now, because there's been a lot of negative news stories out there about how companies, when they get distressed, and there has been a lot of distress since 2014, those are the bills that they stop paying. And so that is eroding confidence in rural Alberta towards continued energy production. It's eroding confidence in the municipalities, who find themselves now strapped for cash because it's a huge source of revenue in a lot of these municipalities. So I think there needs to be you can go one of two ways. I mean, one of the issues is that if you end up having a company go under and those wells get transferred to the Orphan Well Association, they don't pay municipal property taxes. And my understanding is they don't pay landowner leases either. So it's not going to solve that problem by just allowing these companies to go under. The only way to make sure that they pay all their bills is if they're financially viable. If they can pay off some of their reclamation debt, then go to the market and say, hey, my balance sheet looks better. Can you lend me some money for some new drilling? They do some new drilling and they get a virtuous cycle going of cleaning up the old bad wells and then drilling some new ones. And I think that is important, not only for our municipalities and our landowners, but also for government, so that they can generate some new long-term future revenue, not just from all the jobs that are going to be created through a program like that, but also once they've paid off the reclamation debt, the royalty pops right back up to what it would be under the new royalty frameworks. That helps government too. From a junior oil and gas perspective, I know it's a bit controversial because I've been having a lot of discussions about this with those who are in the industry, saying, well, this is just the way it's always been, that we when a company comes along and wants to purchase new assets, that they end up having to take a bunch of the junk along with them. I've had it described to me by one of our new members as it's almost like the asset-backed commercial paper problem that we had, where they took a bunch of mortgages, some of them good, some of them crap, bundled them up, and then they put it out there with a AAA rating because they had mitigated the risk across enough mortgagees. I think that's kind of a good analogy for what's happened here, is that no junior oil and gas company would take on these liabilities unless they had to. And so I think that's one of the ways in which the industry developed, maybe because there was some expectation that future revenues of the company that purchased the assets would pay for the liability. But in practice, what's happened, because they can't get certainty on getting a reclamation certificate, they just keep on packaging them up and selling them on down the road. At some point, you've got to say, okay, some of these wells we're never going to revisit. And so we've got to start cleaning them up. So that would be one thing. The other thing I'd say is that there are a number of sites that I think there should be some kind of assessment to make sure that we're not cleaning up sites that could be used for some other purpose. Like we're now seeing, especially in this new green energy world, that some of the briny water that comes out of these wells has all kind of minerals in it. Lithium, as an example. We did that segment a few weeks ago. And if we can mine out lithium or other rare earth minerals from water that we're producing anyway, we should do a good assessment so that we make sure that we get the maximum value. There are some wells that are going to be great for geothermal development also. And so you don't really want to prematurely close those wells if there's some way of repurposing them and getting them value. So I think that's another aspect that we've got to deal with to maximize the value to taxpayers, maximize the value to the company, make sure you've got a bunch of viable companies so that they're welcomed into rural communities because they're paying their taxes and they're paying their landowner leases. And there's another aspect too of some of these wells that have fugitive emissions and methane, where that's one of the issues the federal government has been concerned about. And if you can reclaim some of those older wells and reduce the fugitive emissions, that might create some carbon credits for you also. So I think that there's a real environmental message and environmental interest in trying to develop a new approach to how we do this reclamation. So I've been spending a lot of time on it, and I hope we're on the cusp of a breakthrough with a pilot project in the fall. If we do get a confirmation of that, our members will be the first to know.
Okay, we got lots of topics here, so I'm going to interrupt you all the time. So just
what you're basically saying is I'm answering long, so tighten it up.
I didn't want to say that exactly, but let's talk a little bit about, let's move away from oil and gas and talk about the tech sector. And I kind of joke because tech is the answer to every problem. It's going to solve the fossil fuel issues. It's going to solve everything as we develop AI and IoT and all these things. So what's going on in the tech sector with our members and our relationships?
One of the things, and I'll give you credit for this, John, when I first came on board, is you said you got to meet Zach Storms and find out about Startup TNT in Edmonton. And we did that one segment a couple of months ago on the custody. I think it was the same day actually that he was doing his full day pitch. Okay. And I ended up watching that on YouTube and was astounded by it. I thought it was a really amazing process. He approaches it. I've talked to him recently, and I said it's kind of like a dragon's den for the tech sector. But he said the difference is that with the dragon's den, these guys come in and it's the first time that they're meeting the people that they're pitching, and then they do the due diligence afterwards. And here's the sad story. A lot of those deals that are agreed to on air, they end up falling apart because there just aren't good fundamentals in those companies. So they've reversed the process and they invite investors in, and then they do a 6-week intensive evaluation of all of these startup companies and narrow them down to the best ones. So they've got a pitch session coming up on August the 19th. I should just mention that because that's where they're doing the initial call for new startups. I think they're expecting 40 different pitches there. But what will follow after that is that investors will get together and they'll do the narrowing down, and then there'll be another pitch, and then they'll do another narrowing down. And at the end of the process, they identify the 10 best companies, 5 in Calgary, 5 in Edmonton, and they award the top one with $125,000. So what I'm hoping will happen is that our AEG members will put together a little team, a little delegation, and that we would take part in the pitch process. We have to get that together. If we could get 5 AEG members in Calgary and 5 AEG members in Edmonton, then we'd all learn together how to evaluate a pitch. And they call it a distributed model as well. You don't have to evaluate all 40. We rely on each other to do the best, to do the due diligence, so that at the end we all have an opportunity to see the very best ones. But I'll give you some idea of why I love this so much. Is that I was intimidated by tech when I first did that interview with Zach Storms. But what I've observed is that there's so many companies that I have developed because people develop an expertise in a particular industry, and then they see a way that they can apply technology to make their lives easier. And there's one in particular that I thought, oh man, like our guys would totally understand that. An excavator, a former excavator, who said, maybe I need to develop this drone technology and put a sensor on the drone so that it can go ahead of an excavator, so it can see if there's anything underground that's an obstruction. So sort of like a mobile Alberta One Call. And I just thought that makes a whole lot of sense. And that's a tech industry. That is the kind of thing that comes out of these pitches. I've gotten the sense that there's almost this, I don't know if it's a rivalry or if there's some concern that tech is a challenge to our traditional industries. It's not how I'm seeing it. I think it's a compliment. I think that some of our traditional industry can look at these new, young, scrappy tech players, and there can be a perfect marriage. So if we can facilitate that coming together, then I would be delighted to do that. I think you and I are both committed with $5,000 to go in on this next pitch session.
What's the cost in terms of money and a time for someone to jump into this?
Oh, completely. And this is the nice thing is that because startup companies, it's sort of interesting in the tech space, startup companies need much less than you would expect. But it's $5,000 for each person to participate in it. And so they have to get, I think that works out to what, a total of 30 investors or so, 30 in each city, so 60 in total. And so if we could have a contingent that would put $5,000, one of the things that is so interesting about the process is that the winner is only one part of it. By being exposed to all of these great ideas, there's a lot of side deals that get made. So in the one that he did in June, apparently there were about $1.1 million in additional side deals that got written aside from the companies that ended up winning. But what they look at it with Startup TNT is an education process that, because this is a bit of an unfamiliar area and people haven't been accustomed to seeing how to evaluate these kinds of pre-revenue companies, this is a way to learn how to do it, develop some confidence so that you can then go on and evaluate additional tech firms. So I think it's going to be a fabulous process to go through. And you and I'll have to do a whole segment after we're done so that we can talk about the process a little bit more and maybe get some folks involved in subsequent rounds.
So if any members are watching or listening to this, let us know if you want to join us, because I think it's going to be exciting. I got introduced to it by Brian Wyatt, one of our board members at the time. And Brian was just amazed at Zach. I know that he's been involved in many of the pitches, and again, many of the side deals that continued because there's just so many young, bright people coming in through.
There really is. And you know what I'm liking to see as well, John, is that there's a complementary effort happening in Calgary with Platform Calgary, and Terry Brock leads that up. They've got a new space that they'll be opening up. I've toured it. They've got a new space that'll be opening up in September, but then opening to the general public in January. And they kind of want to make it like call it a Derrick Club or a Petroleum Club, but for the tech sector, where people who are in that industry can meet and bump into each other and just see what happens when good ideas collide. That's the kind of thing that we've seen in other industries where they have a meeting and gathering place, and that's what they're trying to build here. But they're collaborating with each other to make sure that the industries, it's interesting, isn't it? Like we kind of look at Calgary and Edmonton as having a rivalry, but in some ways we can get a healthy rivalry going of having both Edmonton and Calgary at the same time, developing a tech base and then working to support each other and expanding it out. So I think there's some really exciting things happening in this area. When I talked to Zach about it, he was saying that we went, I think, from year over year, from having 200 million invested in this sector to 500 million year over year. And so I'm not sure if there's any policy changes that need to happen to advance that. Some folks are putting forward some policy ideas, but in some ways it's just a matter of letting entrepreneurs do what entrepreneurs do and allowing it to grow organically and to connect people who have money with the people who need money and just see what develops out of it. And I think we're at the early stages of it, but it looks really promising.
Well, and you just defined AEG, which is let's get the entrepreneurs doing what they do and get everything else out of the way. And so it's neat to see a early stage industry just grabbing and running with it. And again, that defines Zach Storms. But let's talk about other stuff. You talked about a McKinsey report and Flesky. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, when we had the premier in for our first sort of Freedom Day event on July the 2nd, one of the things I was wanting to know is how do we tap into a creation of policy in this area? And he said Brian Flesky is leading that effort. So I met with Brian Flesky, and he commissioned a report that was done by McKinsey, where they looked at the entire universe of tech initiatives that are taking place in the world and developed an 8-part strategy for how Alberta would be able to really kickstart the same kind of interest in investing in venture capital here. And in some ways, I think the government has listened to that call and moved in that direction, because Alberta Enterprise Corporation, not to be confused with Alberta Enterprise Group, they do have a fund of, I think it's now $160 million that does go towards investing in tech companies. Now, it's a bit later stage. It's not the same kind of stuff that Zach does. Zach's stuff is early stage that he profiles. But I think they're beginning to understand that when you're investing in technology, the way to diversify is across a broad range of startups, because then one or two of them might become a unicorn. You're not going to make money on all of them, but you will make enough substantial revenue on the ones that really succeed that it will offset your losses. So it's a bit of an education, I think, for a government investment agency, a crown corporation, to come to that conclusion. But that's where a lot of the gains are going to be made in future, is in applying technology to traditional industries. And so I'm glad to see that we've got some early progress on that. And if we can start adding some understanding around it, maybe making some policy proposals around it, but certainly adding some profile to it, then I think it's a good role for us to play as well.
Well, and then you get into the Amy and the AI section. Really, many of our business guys in Alberta Enterprise Group don't even know what they don't know could come in and help them. And so, that's one of the things they suggested to me at the Machine Learning Institute was, why don't we just get in and talk to some of your people about their business? Because when we see their process, we're going to ask why. Whereas the existing businesses that, we've kind of done it that way.
And I'd say this as well, because I think one of the revelations that happened over the last year and a half of COVID is you don't need to be in Silicon Valley or Kitchener-Waterloo or Seattle or Vancouver to make these projects happen. One of the things that you want is a good environment to attract workers to. And we've got it all, really. Like, we've got the beautiful mountains, 2 gorgeous mountain parks in Jasper as well as in Banff. We've got beautiful outdoors. We've got low housing prices, relatively low cost of living, especially if you're looking at the expense of living in some of those tech centers. We've got access to broadband. We've got great access to markets. Look at WestJet just announcing that they're going to be doing a direct flight down to Seattle. So there's a lot of advantages that we have to offer from a lifestyle point of view that I think can lead to an attraction of the business headquarters here and keep them here. Maybe in a way that we didn't consider prior to COVID, but now that everybody is connected on Teams and on Zoom and on all of these other applications, it's become really easy to do collaboration over these new types of networks. And so I think that plays to our advantage as well. And it may be why we've seen some of the money moving into that field in Alberta too.
Okay, 2 things. We got to watch our time a little bit here, but can you talk about the relationship that's developing with the concerned manufacturers of Ontario and Canada?
I love those guys. We had them on I think a couple of weeks ago, Jocelyn Bamford and Besso Sobat, and they started off as focusing on Ontario and in the manufacturing sector, and now they've realized that they need to broaden it out and be Canada wide. And we've got a lot of common cause, I think, on issues in Alberta and in Ontario. And what I love about the organization is that they're enterprising too. It's they don't want to look to government for the solutions, but they want to make sure that government doesn't create more problems. They really began by fighting against the carbon tax, and now they're fighting against plastics being labeled as toxic. And I think we're going to find other ways that we'll be able to collaborate with them to push forward good policy. And I hope that when we start talking about having another trade mission, that it's a little complicated still to travel freely, even in Canada or in the US. And so we might have to put that off until we have a little more clarity around the rules. But I think that there would be a fantastic trade mission that we could do to Ontario, that they would help to show us around about where some of the some of the great businesses are, where some of the challenges are, and then we could go to Toronto and talk on some of the finance stuff that we're seeing with the divestment movement against our energy sector, and see what we can do to try to do some education there, and then also pop in and see some of the new MPs in Ottawa, as we're probably expecting a fall election. So there'll be some new faces there as well. So I'm hoping that we can develop that relationship out a little bit further, because the trade missions are really what Alberta Enterprise Group has been known for over the years, and getting back to doing a couple more of those. I think the other one that we were looking at doing is potentially going down to Texas. When we mentioned that one, the Premier said he was going to be going down to Texas a couple of times as well in the fall. And if we do that one, that we should collaborate with them also. And I met a new contact as well in the context of tech also, who is a connector in Silicon Valley. And she said she'd be able to organize a trade mission for us to San Francisco, maybe see a Sharks game, and then be able to go and see some of the interesting businesses that are happening around there also, to bring some of that back. So I think we've just got, it's quite amazing, isn't it, that when you start reaching out to find like minds who have similar missions, it's amazing the kind of people that turn up. So I think we're going to have a good, long and fun collaboration with that Ontario group.
Well, we have a responsibility, representing Alberta businesses, to try to create an environment for them to be able to succeed in. And part of that environment does not stop at the border of Alberta. Right? So when we take a look at the area codes of 613 and 905 and 416 and 519, when you get into some of the southwestern Ontario, those business people are exactly the same as us. And we the more we spend time with them, the more we I think connect, as opposed to sitting with the east west us and them mindset that has been promoted at times. We need to build the relationship
completely. We just need to find a similar group in Quebec. So if anyone has any ideas of who we can collaborate with in Quebec, that would be another really worthwhile east-west alliance to form.
And there was a business mission to Quebec previously with AEG, and very successful. Again, found very like-minded business people. Listen, last thing, municipal elections coming up. Why don't we talk a little bit about the two events we have coming up, and some of the thoughts you have.
Yeah, I've done so many interviews on this, because I think part of what I heard when I first came on board with AEG, talking to our members, is one of the issues that they have time and time again is how long it takes to get any building permits approved or development permits approved. And we've talked before about our patron saint, I like to call him, Lance Gilman in Nevada, who was able to work with the state government, Reno, and the local fire chief to get grading permits approved in 7 days and building permits approved within 30 days. He was able to use that to attract Elon Musk to his 107,000 acre business park to build the gigafactory. And you think if that's how easy it can be, if that's what entrepreneurs are looking for and business investors are looking for, then Calgary and Edmonton should be spearheading that. I want to see Calgary and Edmonton competing on who can create the very best business environment by streamlining a lot of that permitting process. So we have forums taking place September the 8th in Edmonton. And we've got, we're going to do the top 5 candidates, unless there are other candidates that emerge in the meantime that look like they have a potential to win. But at the moment, it's Amarjeet Sohi, Kim Krischel, Michael Oshry, and Cheryl Watson, who have accepted our invitation. We are still waiting on Mike Nichols. So if anybody wants to give his campaign a little bit of a poke so that we can get a confirmation, that would be great. And then in Calgary, it's going to be the next day. It's going to be September 9th with the same idea, the top 5 candidates, so we can get a good discussion going. And we've got confirmations from Jody Gondek, Jeff Davison, Brad Field, and Zane Novak. And the one who has not said yes yet is Jeremy Farkas. So once again, anyone supporting Jeremy Farkas and want to give him a quick poke to say yes as well, that would be much appreciated, because I think that would get us into a really good discussion about the issues that matter to the business community in both cities. And so we're hoping to be able to have a full house on both of those.
Now we're going to do it with a interview type as opposed to a debate, and then we'll go into the speed dating. It seemed to be well received the last time the organization used a speed dating process. It'll be a kind of hybrid version of that. But it should be a great event. So I'm excited about both those.
It absolutely will be. I should also mention I've been collaborating with Common Sense Edmonton and Common Sense Calgary to do interviews with all of the candidates for city council. We ended up doing, I think, 36 candidates in Calgary and 21 candidates in Edmonton in our first run through. There have been others who have entered the race. So I've got another batch of interviews that I'm going to do there, and we'll post those up because we want to make sure that everybody's got a fair opportunity to be heard. It's really hard to get your name out in some of those council races. We've got 5 open seats, I believe, in Edmonton, 9 open seats, I believe, in Calgary. So there's a real opportunity to bring in some new, fresh faces and really change the direction that both councils go in each city. So I'm looking forward to seeing a little bit more out of them at the mayor's forum that we hold, and interested in interviewing a few more of those candidates too.
Listen, there's a million other things we can talk about. We're at an hour and a half now, but it's important for our members to understand there's just so many things that we can do. So thank you for being members, because as members, your contribution to the organization allows us to do all of this. And if you can help us continue to grow, that would be significant, because the more resources we have, the more work and more projects that we can take on. We see a huge opportunity to get things out of the way so that you entrepreneurs and builders of this province can continue to do that. So thank you for everybody that is doing that. Please let us know how we can help. And Danielle, any final words?
No, thanks so much as well for saying that, John. I know that you always give so many great accolades and thank yous to our business members, and for good reason, because they're the wealth creators and the job creators of our province. That was John Liston, our Vice President of Alberta Enterprise Group. I'm Danielle Smith, President of Alberta Enterprise Group. If you missed any part of this broadcast, you can always catch it on podcast. Go to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you again next week.